Hello and welcome to The Print. I have with me today author and investigative journalist Bette Dam. She's come out with a wonderful book which was earlier printed in Dutch, but now it's also available in English. It's called Looking for the Enemy, Mullah Omar and the Unknown Taliban. Welcome to The Print, Bette, and thank you so much for this wonderful book. I just finished reading it. So we have a few questions, of course, now that, so many things have just changed in Afghanistan. On 15th of August, we saw how the Taliban marched into the capital, Kabul, and how things have changed there. And right now, it is facing a humongous catastrophe in terms of an economic collapse. The situation of Afghan people is absolutely it just cannot be explained in few words. But I'll come to that. But first, to discuss your book, this is interesting. I mean, this is one character that has demanded and been on the headlines for years. After 9/11, this was like the most wanted sort of a criminal that the world was chasing him as if. And how you sort of spend 5 to 6 years chasing him, going house after house. So just give us a flavor of that. It's fascinating, but it's also quite interesting in terms of the fact that how you interacted with the Taliban and how things sort of unfolded also for you as a journalist.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. So it was a long search. The passion for the search and the interest and the urge came mainly from my own my own position as a Westerner that grew up in the Western stories, very heavily influenced by America, especially in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is very focused on America, and every small TV series that's published in the US will also be on our television, so to say. So we're very linked, and that is the starting point. And so I got this message from after 9/11, the shock that there would be such a big enemy out there that would kill us. And that has been actually always the motivation. And that motivation got a bit more complex when I arrived with the troops from the West, the NATO troops in that country, in Afghanistan. And then I saw our own weaknesses. I was actually not expecting that. As a political scientist, which I am, raised at the university in Amsterdam, I don't think, maybe I forgot, but I don't think I got such a sharp, more critical, independent analysis of who we are, especially in foreign affairs, in countries that we don't know. And that was a shock to me. And so that basically, I saw the strong language, the proud language, or the confident language of the mission, the war on terror mission, with in press releases, and that sending more troops would be always the solution. And so for me, I thought that maybe since the big enemy there was the Mullah Omar, right? The guy and the leader of the Taliban, the sender of suicide bombers. And at the same time, symbolically, I would say that when I spoke to these representatives of us in Afghanistan, they didn't know where he was. They had no clue.
Right.
I found it unbelievable. I found it unbelievable for a Western, self-confident, always proud of itself, tapping itself on the shoulder for bringing the good to the world. I found it unbelievable. And then I started searching him. I thought this is a task as a journalist. And that's this book, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of the revelations that you make in the book, the fact that how the American government at that point of time, in around 2000, 2008, 9 probably. And then the American media house sort of built up this narrative that he is in Pakistan and he's very much supported by them. Whereas when you eventually met the Taliban leaders and you were dealing with them, staying in some of their houses, interacting on a regular basis on the ground, they clearly told you that he was hiding somewhere in Afghanistan. So tell us, how did you find that out? And also, if you can tell us a little bit, because I was also there in Afghanistan. I witnessed the fall of Kabul and had an interaction with the Taliban. It is unbelievable, but then people do not sort of believe that, yes, when you interact with the Taliban, it's a very different perspective that you get as a journalist. So tell us about your experiences and how you were able to break that narrative that, this is not really the enemy, as if if you kill Mullah Omar, the situation will all be sorted.
True. I think I'm happy to hear that you also, as a journalist, found it important to interview all sides of the story. I think that's been the biggest failure of our journalism. We should have started. The American government's enemies are not our enemies. We don't have enemies. And that means you interview all sides of the story. And for the book, there is definitely a heavy reliance on the Taliban, but there's also on that particular story of where was Mullah Omar, for example, after 9/11, there's also a lot of Afghan government sources. The revelations, there's a couple. I mean, honestly, of course, the revelation of like this presence of Mullah Omar, the whereabouts of Mullah Omar after 9/11, not being in Pakistan, was of course the news, the new world news.
Right.
That I could only find that because I did the biography of Mullah Omar. Because I basically was able to meet them in a sort of like more new, like I just talked to them, and slowly I saw that there's like a lot of misunderstanding. Doesn't mean I'm defending them, but there's facts wrong.
Right.
And so by going to his life when he was young, Mullah Omar, in Uruzgan, and speaking to neighbors and going to the places where he lived and speaking to teachers, drivers, his doctors,
even his bodyguard. You've met him.
Yeah, indeed. Then I sort of like also saw this other story of how the Taliban was much more than I was informed about, an Afghan movement that came from the little schools, that concept of the Hujara. We didn't know anything about these schools where the Taliban actually were educated, like Mullah Omar. And that was a very Afghan story. So in the dominant narrative, it was a Pakistan grown wild movement that had actually totally estranged from Afghanistan, had no idea about Afghanistan, would only know how to fight, was unreasonable group. And I think it is a very orthodox group of villagers that I don't even know if I was able to release that sense of the village. I don't know if that was actually something that stuck with you or not, but that the life outside of the couple of cities Afghanistan has is as important to understand the Taliban, especially the Taliban. And I found, so from there, I saw there was also, like there was in the last Afghan government under President Karzai and Ghani, I saw similar distrust towards Pakistan in the Taliban, also before 9/11. And I tried to describe a more complex relationship where this distrust towards them is also impacting decisions the Taliban made. So Mullah Omar was not educated in Pakistan. He has never been on a madrasa. The whole top leadership of the Taliban has not been educated in Pakistan at all. They have been in the madrasa, in the, what is called Hujaras system, which is a very unprofessional, low-level education system, totally Islamic, mostly about how can you live a proper life as a Muslim? How long should your hair be? What turban do you wear? I mean, how do you do good to the other? It's very, very, very simple.
Right.
And I found it quite informative. So when this question, of course, I was not able to ask the question, where was Mullah Omar? Where is Mullah Omar in the beginning of the research? The Taliban were very sensitive to that. They were not willing to talk. There were like conditions in interviews, like you can come, but we are not going to talk about where Mullah Omar is. Most of the interviewees turned out had no idea. Later, I mean, there were not many who knew where Mullah Omar was in the movement. But later on, when I got this sort of a context on who the Taliban was and the relation to Pakistan, and then I didn't find much proof of him being in Pakistan. That hospital story, for example, in Karachi, I didn't find any proof. There was no proof within the NDS, with the Afghan Secret Service. So, and then I started looking for really the people who were close to Mullah Omar. And I managed. So then it turned,
Right. Well, in 2019, in one of your interviews that I saw that you did with DW, you've said that how the Taliban made up this entire narrative around Mullah Omar, and the fact that, the kind of influence he had, whereas he was not that powerful, it was all fake news. And also in your book, you talk about how even an institution like UN, I mean, in UN sanctions list, his name was incorrect, which sort of, it got amended in 2018, but they had their name completely different. And when you approached them, you saw that even they don't have that much information about him. So when you did this kind of an analysis, Betty, what is it that comes to your mind in terms of, in the present context, what is happening in Afghanistan? Why was this character being built up so out of life? And was it to just to show the world that here is one enemy we have? Or is it because somewhere down the line, there was this parallel track going on between the US and the Taliban? And what has happened in 2021 was the eventual consequence of that?
Yeah. I think the UN reports indeed are underperforming, have been all the time. The UN was handicapped. Part of the reason is a handicap because the UN was relying too much on the Afghan government sources, and we see that with the CIA as well. And that's we should have talked about it much more, because every UN report that was drumming up the terrorism threat again and again and again, based on basically very biased information, was making headlines in AP and Reuters the moment they came out, and it was very problematic. It hurt the conflict a lot because there was a much more complex situation in the field, and there was much more openness as well, and there were more little angles where you could have talked instead of fighting. The UN chose to embrace the fighting narrative, basically. And then we were talking about the security reports. Anyway, the situation of 2021, the 15th of August, was personally for me, I knew things were not going wrong well, but it was such a slap in my face of like the realization by literally seeing the Taliban going back in Kabul on the television screen, and I was like, wow, we have. I mean, this is the proof that our mission doesn't listen to knowledge. our mission, the Western military were they didn't want to lose it. They believed that Mullah Omar was in Pakistan, for example. They believed that it was almost like religious, the war on terror to them, and they were deaf. And that was painful for me. That is painful because, what does it say about us and about the democracies that send these troops? That's not a good message. It's not a good message at all. And so we tried to offer an alternative to Afghanistan in the last 20 years. It failed tremendously, and it created so much chaos that the men from these villages, like Mullah Omar and like others, and also from the East, of course, as we see now, got leverage again. We gave it to them. We gave it to them on a platter. And now we need to deal with it. And I am seeing again the international community, including NGOs, Human Rights Watch, acting with a little finger in the air towards them, which I understand. But I also think there should be a lot of modesty of what did we? There's no reflection about what we have done. Nobody wants to do that openly. And we just go on. Same people who have made so many mistakes, who have had a tendency of not doing research well. The idea that the West is always providing good reports that are neutral, we should get rid of that, because they don't. They are very biased. They mostly talk to their own allies. So yeah, this is the result. The result is the worst of the worst. We are dealing with the Taliban that are doing what they always said they would do, and then also a Taliban we hardly know, because despite the fact that I think that this is the worst outcome of the 20 years that you could think of. We need to deal with that, and I'm afraid that the current people who are in the positions in the UN, in the EU, in the US, who actually have to do this job, I am very distrustful to them. They don't give me any confidence based on the last 20 years that they're able to deal with the other, and that worries me a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bette, now, if we come to the present situation today in Afghanistan, when we talk about this international recognition giving to the Taliban and the way the international community is sort of demanding of an inclusive government. Now, first things first is that, was that not an international recognition when the US signed a peace deal with the Taliban? Then we saw the way they forcefully came in, overthrowing every other peace talk that they had. And in the present circumstances, when they need the money, their assets are frozen. The Afghan people are facing so much of problems. Every now and then we hear reports about parents having to sell off their children. Can't even imagine the kind of, the issues that they are going through, the problems we can't even imagine in our wildest dreams. What do you think should be all these countries should be doing now who waged a war there and end of the day just left the country as it is, and the Afghan people at the hands of Taliban? I know that country remains divided hugely on the ethnic lines, but what is the solution, you think, after all these years that you've spent in Afghanistan?
Yeah, it's I tend to say that there is no other way than a combination of deeply looking at ourselves, deeply looking at the mirror and be honest about our own failures, that combined with the modest approach to the situation in Afghanistan, being modest about realizing that you don't know much. There's not much presence of us in Kabul at the moment. Knowledge is difficult to get. Also for me, I'm not in the country at the moment, but I would say talk in the sense of not immediately high diplomatic talks, but get to know them and visit them without a strong agenda, and figure it out. What is the division between the southern Taliban and the Haqqanis, for example? What is it about? I don't think we know yet. There's a lot of assumptions again. What is it that stops them from bringing the girls to the schools? What is it that stops them? Is there a reason? And is that a real reason? Can we speak to at least 50 Taliban to figure it out? Because the movement, as would be every movement that has been in the mountains for so long, is divided, has trouble with accountability, has trouble with, of course, with organizing things. So you need to have quite a substantial presence to understand all this, and to also do a good cross-check in the current toxic situation of fake news coming out of Afghanistan. Twitter is very uninformative at the moment for that reason. So I'm afraid that those things will not happen. I'm afraid that there is a lot of jumping to conclusions and assumptions, which we did in the last 20 years, but I would discourage them.
Yeah. So Betty, my last question to you will be in terms of the fact that since you've also done another book on Afghanistan, you know the society there much more deeply. But then today's Taliban, which has a huge influence also of the Haqqani Network, and that has sort of, also made countries, that is the reason why they are not really dealing with them directly, because there is this thing about Haqqani Network being sponsored by Pakistan. Do you think this is a new Taliban, as what some people discuss? Maybe they'll be different. There'll be shaping a government as what we see in Iran. Or do you think that, no, this is the same old Taliban with their same old tactics? What is it that you think the world should be doing? Do they need that international recognition? They should go ahead.
Right. I think there is no world. I'm sorry for sounding very academic. I think there is a very Western idea of what they should comply with for recognition. A Western idea that West is also not very informed. So they don't know other systems. Like, we only know our own. In international relations, we only know like how democracies work mostly. There's a lack of it. Anyway, I think, of course, when on the 15th of August, I was like, because I know them from before, especially before 9/11, I was looking every day like to their press releases, what they would do. Would they be like a much more angry movement? I would also not be surprised by that, with 20 years of fighting and so many people killed. So many have lost family members. I thought, would they be like extreme, much more extreme, or not? And I saw through media and their press releases, which is not complete. So I'm also not completely informed. I have no background, but I saw that it was not that extreme. I saw that it was actually much. Like it was a little bit, and like, for example, the Tolo news that could continue, the national television, with a female presenter in the beginning. Was that politics or not? It was happening. And I see them, a short answer to this complex question is that I see a lot of similarities with them before 9/11. And in that sense, we can... it's easier to get to know them, because if you know them from before 9/11, you understand better why they want Western recognition, for example, how their attitude will be to Pakistan, what is happening to the unruly commanders in Kabul. Will they use? What sort of sanctions will they use? What is this justice system gonna be like? Why did they not send girls to school before? And how is the situation now? The universities may open up again. What is the problem of not sending girls to school. Well, there is definitely a problem of conservatism that we should not judge on. It is happening. It is there. We can talk about it, and we can mediate, and we can provide ideas. Not immediately money, maybe, but just have a conversation on that front. Because we do know that there is, of course, the Doha gang, so to say, who send their children to school, right? And the ones in Pakistan as well. So we can also say, hey, how is that going? And how do you relate to the commanders who have not seen anything than the mountains and refuse any education for their girls, mainly because of conservatism and a sort of tribalism background. And so that is an important point too, where we basically wonder, like, what are the important outcomes of this book? And I think that's first of all, that instead of the monstrous picture we got from the Taliban, there's also some complexity to it, some nuance. We saw in our research that before 9/11, there was a will to deal with the Americans. There was also not much enthusiasm as we expected for the presence of the Osama bin Laden in the country. Mullah Omar was uncomfortable with that. Instead, Mullah Omar was indeed much more looking for recognition of the West. He thought that the Islamic State was also something the Americans wanted when they were fighting the jihad, which the Americans indeed did say at the time. And so then we see that 9/11 happens, where Osama bin Laden, the group of Osama bin Laden is involved in something in the US, and in, of course, the attacks on 9/11. And that's something Mullah Omar has no idea about. Mullah Omar doesn't know, is first of all not even really panicked when he hears it, while his whole team around him is. And then we see that there is still the request to deliver Osama bin Laden, and the relationship between Mullah Omar and Osama bin Laden is at that time the relationship between Mullah Omar and the Americans is at that time deteriorated to a situation full of distrust. There's hardly any dialogue anymore, while there was in the beginning. And Mullah Omar sees sees that basically the war that will follow, that will topple his regime, is a war against him, and he's full of distrust. And then the war starts, the regime is toppled, the Arabs leave for Pakistan, and then something very important happens, is that you see that this Taliban, who were never really so much against a relationship with the US, as we know, a diplomatic relationship with the US, basically in December, we see that the leadership of the Taliban is in contact with then President Hamid Karzai and surrender. Something that Karzai announces to the world, is happy to announce it, but then we see that the Americans block it, and Karzai is not defending it, and will not defend it ever again. The news that most of the Taliban gave up, Mullah Brother, for example, the current big leader in Kabul, left for his home in Derawood and lived there for 2 years, until he was so often harassed by the Americans that he fled for Pakistan. And that surrender basically did happen, though it didn't happen in our narrative. It did happen in Afghanistan, and that resulted in a bizarre situation where you have basically for 4 years, 5 years, I would say, you have hardly any enemy in Afghanistan. And what you do have is a very response of the Americans with thousands of troops who are sent to Afghanistan. And that creates this situation where the American special forces and other troops and Brits and the whole world is behind this mission, are searching for the Taliban and asking their Afghan government allies to search for them as well. And that the last point I want to make, that is very interesting, is I think that you see this it's not interesting, it's also very painful, is that you see that this freedom to give up, to basically being paid even to point at an enemy, is the main reason why the Americans lost. Why? Because the Afghan government took the freedom that they were given to point at rivals, to point at other people that had nothing to do with the Taliban or that would surrender Taliban to kill them. And so in the first 4 years, all these thousands of troops act daily and kill daily. And that created so much chaos, so much unrest. And that was basically the moment that the Taliban could start organizing itself again, based on this system where innocent people were killed. And that was, in the end, the way the Americans operated at that time and continue to operate together with all the NATO allies by focusing solely on the military solution. And then you see that because of these like killings by the international community of people who are not Taliban, who were not Taliban, or who are not Taliban anymore, that creates a lot of unrest. And that is basically the moment that the Taliban doesn't have a lot of difficulties to reorganize itself again. Well, in the beginning, in 2001, everybody was super happy that the Taliban had gone. There was a lot of hope and welcoming to the alternative that the Americans offered, saying that they would offer that. And that turned out to be an alternative that would bring nothing to the country and that would only bring the Taliban back.
Well, thank you so much, Betty. That has been wonderful. This is the book, and this is the Print's page turner. Betty, thank you so much. And I hope that you come out with another book very soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.